Hey boys and girls, today I'm talking to Ann Garcia, also known as the College Financial Lady. And she is awesome because she helps us understand if you want to be really good parents and you really want to look forward to taking care of your kids when they're old enough to go to college. But then you also have to ask yourself, well, if I put money into college, how do I actually still follow my own investment goals and get on the easy path to retirement and follow the ideal investor journey towards the time freedom point? So Anne and I are going to decide and discuss this and give you really practical input on how you can look after your kids and make sure that they are ready for college financially while still not forgetting what you want to do for yourself and for your retirement. So come to the show, be impressed, and see what Anne has to share. Hello and welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. Today we're going to talk about a topic that is probably a little bit more for our younger audience or those who get babies late. And today we have Ann Garcia here with us, and she is known as the College Financial Lady. And she will help us to learn a little bit about how that actually works with college financing and maybe investing on the side. So Ann, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here and making the time. Tell us a little bit, how does somebody get that moniker of the College Financial Lady?
So I'm a financial advisor, and early on in my career as an advisor, I found that a lot of our clients were asking questions about how to plan for college. And at my firm, no one was really interested in answering them. And so I decided that as an advisor who wanted to serve clients and as a parent of young children, that this was something I was both personally and professionally interested in. And so I started being the go-to resource in my firm for these questions. What I found over time was that I was hearing the same questions again and again and again. And so I started writing the answers down and converted that into a blog, which then got picked up in a New York Times article, and I had to come up with a name for it. And so that was...
Oh, okay.
That was it. There are better ways to name your product or service.
Well, I think the College Financial Lady is actually a pretty good one, even if you gave it to yourself, no, that's all good and probably well deserved if you made it to the New York Times, right? So for our audience, what we're interested in is, does it make a difference if somebody is basically asking you that question in their 20s, 30s, or 40s?
Yeah, so I would say less pertinent is the age of the person asking the question. More pertinent is the age of the child of the person asking that question.
And have a 15-year-old, then it gets tricky, right?
Right. Well, and only because it's never too late to start planning and saving, but the earlier you start, the more choices you have. And of course, the law of compounding is one of the immutable laws of the investing world, which says that, the sooner you start, the more work your money does. The later you start, the more work you do to achieve the same financial goal. So, a parent of a newborn who starts by saving $1,000 a year will have more money than the parent of a 15-year-old who starts saving, say, $6,000 or $7,000 a year, just because of the opportunity for compound growth in that savings account.
Okay. So if I hear you right, you're saying the age of the baby is more important than the age of the parent.
It's more important, but it's certainly not the only factor, because obviously, people have children at all different ages. And so their own needs are going to be different over time. So a 40-year-old having their first child has had a lot of time to, save for other needs. And chances are their child is going to go to college, particularly if they've been following the other advice that you give. The child will be going to college after they have retired from their day job. And,
well, if they're in their 40s and they started as early as you said, then they should be done, because we always say you normally should be able to get to your time freedom point in 10 years or less. It would be very unusual to take more than 10 years. So if they start at 30, which is typically when most people are done with their own college, and do it for 10 years with a reasonable job, then by 40, when they get to you and say, hey, I made a baby, what do I do now? Then, Yeah, cool. Well, that makes sense. On the other hand, when you're looking at what can people do and working for a financial advising firm, what are the kind of things that you guys recommend for parents?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing, or one of the most important things that parents can do, is understand what college really costs. We see these things that college costs $75,000 or $80,000 a year. While there is a large pool of people who are willing to pay that much for college, the majority of college students don't actually pay that much money to go to college. So how much you pay is going to depend a lot on your family's overall circumstances, as well as on the choices that you make. So you can choose to educate your children for just about any price that you're willing to pay, as long as you are willing to have those educational choices available to you. So, that might mean that your child starts out at community college or earns a lot of AP and IB credits in high school, or does one of those combined community college last 2 years of high school programs so that they only have 2 years of college left, or chooses a college that's very generous with scholarships for students like that, like your student. Where it doesn't work is when you say, we have to go to an Ivy League. And if that's you, then you have to expect that you're going to pay what it costs to go to an Ivy League. So I think the most important starting point is, what is college going to actually cost you? And what are you going to choose to make your college budget be? Now, most people's college budget is a combination of savings, spending from their income, potentially tax credits if they're eligible for the education tax credits, and maybe some student loans. So you can add up all those things and come up with what's a reasonable budget and say, okay, we're going to look for colleges that will meet that budget. Or you can look aspirationally and say, if you're a parent of a young child, I would love for my kid to have the opportunity to attend a private college, an out-of-state college, an Ivy League college, and work the numbers backwards from there. So I think that's one of the really important pieces, is just understanding what college actually costs, because most people don't pay $80,000 a year for college. And most people who want to save for college and think that that's the target are going to quickly get frustrated, throw up their hands in despair and just say,
yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing, and I'm assuming that you have those conversations when this topic comes up. What are your thoughts when you talk to parents that are considering, how to go about it and how much should it be and so forth, in the context of providing pretty much the X number? If you say it's 20,000 or 40,000, or maybe even the crazy 75, 80,000, this whole dynamic of, should the parents really take the position or the view of providing the whole amount? Or is there any place to say, well, if we pay for everything, is that really benefiting the kids long term?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's something that a lot of families struggle with. There are plenty of parents who feel, honestly, two things. One is they feel like talking with their kids about money is about as awkward as talking with them about sex. It's, comparably important. And I also think that a lot of parents feel like constraining their child's college choices on the basis of money is sort of the equivalent of visiting the sins of the father on the son, just that my inability to provide you all of these potential pathways is going to constrain your future. And that's not true. People are very successful coming out of a lot of different college types. If you look at the college that has the most Fortune 500 CEOs as alumni, is not Stanford, it's not Harvard, it's Penn State, followed by Texas A&M.
That's assuming they actually graduate, right? Most of
that's assuming that they graduate.
Well, what I was actually getting at, and maybe I kind of hit that a little bit where I asked the question, I've always been complaining, anybody who has seen my writings or podcasts or anything like that, or even just talk to me, I've always been complaining. And I mean, I'm too old. My daughter already went through her thing and everything. But I hope, especially when you have access to people where the kids are either just born or relatively young, that there would be an opportunity, and I'm just asking it straight out, but instead of talking about here is how much we can afford kind of conversation, like you said, it's kind of similar to talking about sex, to more, not a conversation, but an education, right? Like I wish I had known more about and had somebody who helped me like you, whether it's for college financial or financial advice in general, to say, okay, well, I would have loved to take my daughter on that journey from early on. Not so much to say, oh, look how hard I work or anything like that, but more to say, okay, so here is how this works. here is how we actually allocate this. Here is what we're putting aside. Here is what we're consuming. Here is what these investments are. And even if there is not a full comprehensive understanding, that's kind of what I'm getting at, to what extent you can help parents, regardless how old they are, how old the kids are, to recognize that they're doing an amazing, I think everybody that I know would probably say, I wish I would have known or learned a little bit about it, even if it's just what my parent actually did with their money.
Yeah.
So that I could have been smarter when I get kind of like to the point to make some money.
That's a great point. And I think there's two paths that parents need to go down when they're approaching college from that perspective. And in my book that's coming out next month, How to Pay for College, I talk about both of them. So one path is, what are the conversations that you're having as a family around college? Right. And how do you have age-appropriate conversations and activities for your kids? Because obviously telling your 5-year-old, we have a 529 plan that's got enough in it for you to go to Oregon State is silly. It's, there's no point in.
No, I was hoping you would say, we tell you how we can take grandma's $50 and make it into 500.
Right. So one piece of the conversations is, like I said, within the family, and just talking about where sort of college fits in your life. So between parents, that's getting on the same page about, are we paying 100% of college? Do we want our kids to have some skin in the game? How important is it that they have a similar path as we did, whatever your college path was? My husband and I always joke that our kids have our college gear up to about size 7, because that was right when we realized that we were never going to send our kids to either of our colleges, just because they would cost too much. Yeah. So it's having those conversations as parents with your children, having conversations about college just from the perspective of, when your kids are young, that college is an expectation for them, both in terms of experience and in terms of life preparation. When they're really little, maybe it's talking about oddball things you learned while you're in college. Like, one of the things that I really enjoyed when my kids were home during the pandemic, my son was taking a meteorology class at college, and he was talking about the things he was learning in it. My daughter was taking an art history class, and she said, this is so interesting. Come sit in on one of my lectures. Those are all the kinds of things that you can bring up with, even with young children. Hey, crazy weather out right now. What I learned in meteorology class in college was that the reason that we have thunderstorms is X. Or, I had a great day at work today. I really enjoy my work. I wouldn't have been able to do my job had I not gone to college. Going to college sports events or other events at a local college campus. Those are all great things to do with young kids. Once they start getting a little older, it's easier to incorporate in topics like savings and compound growth. And honestly, a 529 college savings plan is a great way to show kids how small, incremental, disciplined investments over time can lead to large amounts of money in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who are not necessarily currently nursing any kind of kids to the college age, can you just in a nutshell real quick say what a 529 is?
Yeah, so 529 is a tax-favored college savings account. Typically, there are a few different tax benefits that come with them. One is 529 plans are by and large sponsored by states, and many states will give you a tax deduction for some or all of your contributions every year. Then the growth within the account is tax-free, and the distributions, as long as they're used for qualified higher education expenses, are also tax-free. So there's an added benefit to 529 plans in the financial aid formulas, which can be very beneficial to people who are targeting early retirement and trying to keep their income low during the college years so that they might qualify for additional financial aid. And that's that because those distributions are tax-free, they don't generate income for you on your tax return, which flows through to your financial aid filings.
Okay. So that basically means if somebody were to say, okay, my normal tax return, if I didn't do this 529 thing, let's say I had 60,000 taxable income. If I put $10,000 a year into that 529, then I only have 50,000 taxable income. And that might, I don't know where the line is, but that might help you to qualify for something that you otherwise might not.
Well, it's a little different from that. So it basically, if you were to use a taxable brokerage account to save for college instead of a 529, when you go to take those funds out, all of the capital gain that you realize in liquidating those assets in a taxable account flows through on your tax return as income. Your income is the primary factor for determining how much financial aid you're eligible for.
Understood. So would you say that the types of investments you can do within a plan like that are the same, or are there any limits on what you can put the money against?
Yeah, so a 529 is more like a 401k than like an IRA or a taxable account in terms of your investment choices. There's always a set menu of investments that are available to you. Most plans have a combination of enrollment-based portfolios, which are very similar to target date funds that your 401k offers, and then static portfolios where you can buy, US equity index or international equities or different forms of fixed income. You can't buy individual stocks in a 529 account, nor can you buy alternative investments, no real estate, no crypto, nothing like that. It's really...
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important for people to realize, because we have those discussions, not because of the approaching college age, or even the conversations that you typically have, but to answer the question, can I use my money with leverage, or am I basically bound not to use it with leverage? And what I mean by leverage is like in a real estate deal, right? You find a property, put 20% down, get 80% from the bank, and make basically, if you calculate everything in no particularly awesome circumstances, you're making at least 20-25% on that 20% down payment. So from what I understand, what you just explained is it's more like a cash payment, right? You buy a mutual fund, wherever that might be situated, and you put your money in, and hopefully it performs well. And then you get your returns, and you don't have to pay taxes on those returns.
That is correct. Yeah. So it's, like I said, it's much more like a 401k plan than an individual brokerage account or other investments. But, lots of families do use alternative forms of investment to fund college. I have friends who bought each of their kids an investment property when they were born, on the assumption that by the time they got to college age, it would be cash flowing enough to pay for 4 years college.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. I mentioned Brandon Turner from Bigger Pockets, who did that with a fourplex for his kids, even though he only had one at the time when he started, and then made the other ones later. But what I'm also curious about, especially in this year, and I'm very glad, for one, maybe we can help you a little bit with your book, but also because this year, I think you would agree, for most people that look into any kind of investment or financial markets, realize, wow, this year is different. Not in the sense like we had the last 2 years with the pandemic, but really from a financial perspective. So I wonder what people would say if they had taken your advice 3, 4, 5 years ago, and they have been working with you, and now we have a year like this where like pretty much most of the mutual fund or equity investments are like 20-30% down. If they were close or coming up close to their years where they actually want to draw from it, is there any way that anything they can do to avoid the hit, or how would you help them?
Yeah, this year's pretty crazy because we have this triple bear market between equities, fixed income, and cash all being in bear markets. One thing that I always encourage people to do when they are using a 529 plan to save for college is to use the enrollment-based portfolios. When you do those, as you get closer to college, a larger and larger allocation of your portfolio is in not just fixed income, but typically in short-term tips. And so those have more or less held even, have been fairly close to break even. There are some plans that offer things like stable value funds where you'll get a guaranteed nominal rate of return. There are some prepaid tuition plans that can also make sense for late stage college savers. And those are plans where your money grows at the rate of tuition increases. So for example, my daughter goes to University of Chicago. They're a member of a plan called the Private College 529, and you put money in and you're buying a certain amount of tuition regardless of when you redeem it. So things like that can be, again, within the universe of college savings options, those are more defensive strategies. The challenge that you always have is that balancing between being defensive and not losing your principal, and college tuition inflation going up by 6% a year and oftentimes outstripping your, the growth in a very conservative portfolio. And that's where things like having other asset classes in your overall investment mix can be really beneficial.
Yeah, and that's actually a beautiful segue to other questions I wanted to ask. For one, you mentioned that tuition has been growing 6%. Now we know at least last year, now this year, so far at least, we are like in the 7, 8, 8.5% inflation. I don't know, is college tuition going to catch up to the actual inflation, or are they just kind of steady as she goes, and sometimes inflation is high and sometimes it's low for the rest of us?
So here's the funny thing about college tuition inflation. There's the list price of college, and that's where you see those 6-7% annual rates of inflation. And then there's the net price of college, which is what people actually pay. And the net price of college has been pretty flat for the past almost decade. Last year, the average tuition discount rate, which is the percent of the total dollars of college tuition charged minus what was actually paid, was over 56%. So that means that even though list prices are going up by quite a bit, the actual amount that people pay to attend college has not changed all that much over time, largely because of scholarships and other forms of tuition discounting that colleges provide. So where was I going with this?
Well, I mean, the question was if they would potentially change this when inflation in the regular market is so much higher now.
Yeah. Well, and colleges, because a lot of the services that they offer are food services to students, housing to students, the staffing of dining halls and residence halls and whatnot, which are all the areas that have been badly hit by inflation. One would expect that that will show up in college budgets somewhere. Now, to what extent it's absorbed by endowments and other resources versus passed along to the students, it's going to vary tremendously from college to college. You know, colleges have three main sources of revenue. Endowments are one, state funds for state public schools are another, and then tuition is the third. So when you have schools that are highly dependent on tuition and state budgets, you're probably going to see the impact of inflation flowing down to the students. Those that are more heavily endowment funded are able to manage those costs a little better.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, these endowments, where are they invested?
So endowments are invested a lot of different ways, depending on the college. You know, Yale is real famous for their investment model.
Sorry for interrupting, but when the regular markets go down, like you mentioned earlier, right, are they in similar investments, or do they all own real estate, or
They have a lot of real estate. Okay. They do hold a lot of real estate.
So they are basically in my camp, where we're still, I call us right now for this year, first half 2022, we are last man and woman standing in the investment world, because everything else it's pretty much been hammered more or less. So yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Well, I mean, real estate's the ultimate uncorrelated asset class.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, it's one of the few, I always mention this in our conversations and podcasts, where for one, as I mentioned earlier, you can use leverage, but I also feel it's really almost kind of on equal footing to what the government does to help people to actually start a business. It's kind of like investing in real estate, like all the benefits, whether it's 1031s or the deductions, or, you know, that you can exchange and all kinds of things. I mean, I don't lightly say you would basically have to struggle to not make 20% on your invested money, right? Like, no, I'm not talking about the house itself or the property itself. I'm talking about you're buying
return on capital.
You're buying a $150,000 property that you rent out to a nice family, maybe in the process of making a college kid or having a college kid in the future. You put $30,000 down. If that place increases in value, let's say by very conservatively 5%, right? That's $7,500 on your $20,000 or $30,000. That alone is already those 20%, not even deductions on the tax deductions or any kind of income, positive cash flow that we're always mentioning. For our clients, right? Nobody should actually make an investment with our help and not have positive cash flow from day one. So that's another couple, 3, 4, 5, 6,000, right? So you really have to struggle. If you take the things that the government says we want private people, private individuals like you and me, participate in providing shelter to the population, then you get all these benefits, right? And so that's part of it. And I think value assets in the future is going to be an important thing. Now, one thing talking about future, I've come here from Germany 27 years ago, and I grew up in an environment where going to college, well, you could either, I mean, we have that here too, right? Like you got to be a nerd is kind of like the one thing. But the other was like really for people who clearly said, I want to go down this academic route rather than something more practical or something more entrepreneurial. And in all these years here, I felt it gets more and more pigeonholed. If you don't go to college, you basically won't have a successful life. I'm really curious because you're living in this space all the time. Do you think this will continue, or will there come a time again where going to college and getting a degree is not kind of like the prerequisite to a successful life?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I went to high school in Germany for a while myself. So so I've seen these different trajectories that people are on.
You wouldn't have seen 90% of your fellow students to say, I got to figure out which college I'm going to go.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we're already seeing a change in the reduction of requirements for college degrees for a lot of career paths, both at the grassroots level and at a higher level. I mean, the state of Maryland is going through a process right now where they're reclassifying job requirements for a lot of positions, specifically eliminating college degree requirements for a lot of careers that don't actually require them. We're also seeing a lot more emphasis on trade and professional schools. So among the recent changes to 529 plans is allowing those funds to be used for trade schools and vocational education. So I would like to think that there will be, not that college degrees will be less necessary, but there will be more opportunities and more career paths open to people who don't go down that pathway, who, where we can get better at training people for alternative, for non-college career paths. I think a big part of that has to start at the high school level, because what I observe at high schools is there's a tremendous focus on the academic paths. If your high school offers AP or IB, they are marketing that heavily to all of the students. They are not marketing shop class anymore or pathways like that.
I totally agree with that. The thing that why I asked the question is I'm always trying to keep an eye on what's happening in the economy. And I mean, for many, many years and still to a lesser degree now, I'm still being invited to provide consulting and advice to companies and organizations. And what I hear them say more and more in the last few years is literally to say, well, we hire somebody, but especially when we're hiring out of college, we pretty much know that we have to train them for our needs, at least for the first year, sometimes two, depending. I mean, I did a lot of work in the pharmaceutical industry, or I'm doing quite a bit of work in the high tech and automotive industry. And almost everybody, and I mean, just literally, I listened to an interview with the Tesla Drivers Club or something like that on YouTube. And Elon Musk was literally saying, if you could show me a place where I can hire today 100 really good software programmers, I would hire them immediately, and another 100 tomorrow and another 100 tomorrow, and I can't get them. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't people graduating with software degrees or programming degrees and stuff, but not ready to actually go into a company and be, in a sense, making an impact. I don't want to say they're not useful, but they need a lot more specific training before a company actually gets some benefit out of them, which makes me wonder, okay, the scientific method that was originally developed to help people in academia and to do research, especially foundational research, is not really what our more and more specialized industry and companies are really need. And to have to wait, right? If you really think about it, if you just do the normal, you have to wait 4 years, maybe in some cases 6 and 8 years before you can really get in, just to find out, well, you learned something and you can do a beautiful paper about it, or you even did a thesis. But now the real world starts. I always felt that is a little bit of a tricky thing. So I'm wondering how many, or it's connected to this other point about, why is it that so many successful entrepreneurs ultimately decided, well, I stop college and actually start the business that I have in the back of my mind. So that's really kind of cool. But I think we're going a little bit potentially down the rabbit hole. One thing that I want to bring us back to the college financial lady, so to speak. You said you're also part of a financial advisory firm. And I would like to hear a little bit, okay, if we take somebody who is reasonably successful in their work and they have kids, regardless of age, where they actually follow your suggestions and maybe what's in your book about that college part. But how would you weigh? Is there a certain percentage where you say, okay, well, you probably want to do something for yourself. You want to prepare for at some point maybe able to retire, or I would say reach the time freedom point. How would you weigh this effort to support one or more kids to be able to go to college and have at least a good part of it covered versus, the adults, so to speak, doing something for their own progress financially?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say there isn't one set of answers, because every individual is different. Everyone's time freedom point is different. Everyone's aspirations for their children are different, and their abilities to fund those things are different. I mean, I think when you look at what someone's overall aspirations are, how we're going to fund their retirement is often going to be a function of how long they want to live in retirement. We always like to have our early retirees have an income producing asset.
Right, exactly.
That they're not depleting. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of real estate as an investment, not only for all the reasons that you just listed, but because real estate forces you to be a good and disciplined investor. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Forces you to look away, keep reinvesting.
Exactly. Well, the other beauty of real estate is that you don't really, at least the way we're doing it in residential real estate, you don't really need to answer the question of how old you want to get. Mm-hmm. Because if you have from day one a positive cash flow asset and you look after it reasonably well by having some maintenance reserves and some capex reserves over time, I always say when you interview a lot of people that have spent a lot of time becoming experts or becoming well-versed in real estate, and you ask them, what is the biggest mistake in your investing career, especially in real estate? Most of the time you will hear some stories about, I should have never sold that asset, or I should have analyzed better and not buy this one, but buy this one, I would have made money from day one. Rarely would you hear somebody say, oh, I should have sold this earlier. Right. And so my answer to that is always, okay, I don't really need to answer the question of how long do I want to be retired if I'm willing to tell myself, and if we go back to my maybe soon to be college age kids, they are going to be the ones who are actually inheriting this portfolio that I'm building. Well, then I can get 90 or 100 or 120, it doesn't matter. That just pushes out the date when they're going to inherit it, but it will be there. Right. And so that's one of the beautiful things in this context. What I was getting at is, do you suggest that somebody who is really eager to look after their kids in the financial sense, to make them prepared financially to go to college, maybe not to Ivy League, but anything reasonable, to kind of pause their own investing intentions for a while? Or do you think there should be a little bit of a balance between what you do for your kids and what you do for yourself?
I think there has to be a balance. Kind of my rule of thumb is, if you were to look at, how much you can save for retirement every year. So let's say you're over 50, you can save $27,000 a year in a dedicated retirement account per parent. If you're not doing that, and whether it's in your 401k or whether you're buying real estate or whether you're putting it in a taxable account, whatever it is, if you're not doing that, then at most you should be contributing 10% of what you're putting into that savings, into college savings. And if you want to save more for college, then bump up your other savings first.
Okay. Yeah,
if you're doing that and you're on a track to fund that lifestyle you want, then you can start looking at what additional funds you have available to pay for college. But those two have to happen in balance. For the vast majority of people, there are those out there for whom that's not the case. Take, for example, someone who's followed your advice all along and has built up a nice portfolio of properties that are cash flowing, and maybe because they're working, they want to just redirect some of that cash flow towards some liquid savings for college. Great. Knock yourself out because everything else is on track, but these are just sort of ways to think about it. It does have to happen in balance with your other goals. But at the same time, for most families, it's their second biggest expense after retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're both finding, going kind of back to where we started, is really a little bit looking at what is your time horizon, right? If somebody came to me and they either have young kids or telling me that they're going to have kids or planning to have kids sometime soon, I would say, okay, then let's work these first 10 years or maybe 11, 12 years to create a portfolio where you have the freedom to decide, do I want to keep doing the job that I'm doing or the kind of work that I'm doing or not? And if you then come to the point, now your kids, let's say, are 9 to 12 years old, still plenty of time until they're going to go to college, to say, okay, well, I could keep going for a few more years to get that college fund kind of secured. And what I always point out in that context is, when we use this kind of marathon rather than sprint approach, these properties, these assets that you're developing and that you're owning, they appreciate. I mean, right now, when you look at the inflation, like they may not fully appreciate at the level of inflation, but they typically appreciate 3, 5, 6, even sometimes last few years, 10 and 12%. So by the time this 20-year time horizon for your kids, or 19, whenever they get out of high school, becomes reality, you probably have tons of equity sitting there. You have a really nice cash flow. And if you decided, okay, I could just for myself stop now, but I keep going 2 or 3 more years with work and with investing. So I have these, I don't know, 1 property per year investments beyond my own time freedom point. Well, then that's the way to go. And then you basically provide all the other instruments that they would need to have and the 529s and whatever they can take advantage of. So I think fundamentally, one thing that I'm kind of re-encouraged, so to speak, by talking to you is start as early as you can, even if you haven't made the kids yet. But if you have that intention and you think this family is going to have a college student at some point potentially, then just start looking for advice. And if you want to talk to the college financial lady on knowing how to do this, then I think they should come to you, Ann.
Yeah. And I think that, you make a great point. When your child is born or before they're born, you have 18 or more years to figure this out. So that's a great, great time to start thinking about it because you have so many more choices and so much longer of a time horizon for appreciation, whatever asset it is that you choose to dedicate towards your children's education. The other corollary piece of that is, as you said, you might choose to go on a little longer or not, but your kid is probably going to choose to go to college right out of high school if they're going to college.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
so one timeline is fixed and the other one is a little bit more flexible.
Right. And it's also, I mean, as you get, if somebody works with you or with me or both of us kind of in parallel from early on, those folks who are now, if you for a moment switch the perspective to them being parents, they are basically modeling as their kids are getting older, how a responsible investor actually behaves, lives their life, handles their money, and so forth and so forth. So there is this aspect of being a role model as well, which I have seen many, many times with our clients, makes the kids or young adults appreciate differently what is actually happening, not only for them, but how the whole family operates and how they handle money, rather than to say, okay, well, we made it into high school. We have like 2 or 3 or 4 more years. Now we really need to hustle. That's a totally different situation, right? Than living a life as a role model that is responsible with their money, not just for the kids, but also for themselves.
Yeah. And I think too, when you start thinking about college, just like any other goal with a longer time horizon, it gives you more of an opportunity to be goals-based in your approach to it. And in particular, when you're modeling that for your children, having a goals-based approach is being able to tell them, we've been saving so that you can go to college. And here's how we're saving. And here's how we're investing. And here's how we're doing this. And our goal is that you can get through college without taking out any student loans. Or our goal is that we will pay all of your college tuition. Or our goal is that you'll be able to go to graduate school after you go to college. And that's a much more powerful conversation because it opens up so many opportunities to talk about all the things that we've been talking about. How do we save? How do we invest? How do we make choices like this? Versus, oh crap, you're 16 years old.
How did that happen? Yeah, exactly. Well, and
I'm supposed to get you a car and send you to college.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the other part about it is on that journey, we call that actually the ideal investor journey. I always recommend celebrate the wins, right? If you buy your first property, celebrate that. If you actually reached a certain level in your 529, celebrate with the family for keeping that as a part of awareness. But I think it's also worth celebrating and being basically grateful for having reached those milestones on the way to the ultimate goal. And, that also raises understanding that these celebrations, when the kids look back and say, okay, well, every year there was something that we celebrated, right? That sticks. I think most, if you were to ask me looking back, what is in my memory other than some of the negative stuff are the celebrations, right, that we had, whether they were birthday celebrations or graduations or stuff like that, right? So why not making your financial success steps, celebrations as well.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think, as long as you are disciplined and intentional in how you approach, as with any other financial goal, you will have plenty to celebrate along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And people like you, and I'm trying to be in the same position. I mean, that's why I love the mentoring, because I want to help people, stay on course and then have those celebrations, right? And guide them a little bit along the path. So if we look at all of that, you know that there are always two questions at the end of every podcast, right? So the first one I need to ask you, Ann, is if you could meet anybody, who would it be and why?
I know, and this is such a tough question, and I've been thinking this over in my head for so long, and every day it's a different person. I would love to go back in time and meet Einstein.
Oh, really? Okay. And why would you want to meet him?
I'm just so curious about what he's like as a person, because I think there must be an extraordinary level of curiosity there about all kinds of things, and I would love to see how he approaches new things. Because it's easy to look at all the stuff that's written down and whatnot. But what I want to see is, how does he react to a situation and incorporate new information?
Yeah, that would be definitely cool. Yeah, I always thought that there must be a pretty impressive amount of creativity, right? I saw, for example, these explanations that he gave using, and you said you went to school in Germany for a little bit, and Münchhausen, and the fable about the writing on the cannonball, right? To try to explain the theory of relativity. That's pretty creative if you think about it, right? So, or there's another one where, you're sitting in a train and you're going faster than the speed of light. What does that do to your age, right? Those kind of things, I would totally come with you and just be a fly on the wall and listen to.
All right. Well, if I can get that dinner appointment, you're coming with me.
Yeah. Okay. That would be good. All right. Yeah, that would be really nice. Now, the other and the final question is, if you had a time machine, you could go forward, backward, you would know what you know, and you can come back. Where would you go and why?
Yeah. So I was a history major in college.
All right.
So I spent a lot of time, observing from afar the historical world. I wrote my thesis about the treaties at the end of World War II. And then when I coincidentally, right after I graduated from college in 1989, everything that had come out of that had kind of blown up.
Yeah. Well, they made a good peace accord after that, right? So
I would love to go back to that time where the post-war order was being drawn up and be a part of that conversation. Having seen that arc, and in fact, that was one of the times when I was in Germany, was I worked there from 1989 through 1990. And so it was...
So you could see people coming across the wall and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For me, that was also really weird because I was still there and I was in the Air Force at the time. And my whole career, I had been basically training for the big red bear across in Eastern Germany and Czechoslovakia and those kind of places. And suddenly peace broke out. So I was like, what? How do we handle that? But it was also an amazing time. I'm sure you would agree about that. So yeah, Absolutely. Very cool. So yeah, there are these kind of places, I've also appreciated history as well. And I'm going back and forth when it comes to observing history. If I would want to talk to Cleopatra or to anybody in ancient Greece and stuff, like those kind of people. So, or a pharaoh who directed somebody to build him a pyramid or, stuff like that.
I know it's hard to pick just one time to go back to.
Yeah. Well, before we close, I have to give you an opportunity. Tell us what the title of the book is and when it comes out and where people can get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my book is called How to Pay for College, and it is available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your favorite independent bookstore. It comes out on July 19th, and you can learn all about it on my website, which is also howtopayforcollege.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anybody who does that, I want to strongly encourage you to leave a comment on Amazon, because that helps Ann to get on the bestseller list for the college financial lady, to be number one on Amazon, right? That's what we want to help you with.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and definitely appreciate any reviews that anyone puts there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. Well, and it was wonderful to have you and get a little bit of a glimpse into this world of college finance and how that plays into the bigger picture. So I hope we can maybe do it again after the book came out and you're the number one, if you're still willing to come to our show.
Love to do it.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and sign up for the Apple Podcast link. And if you like to talk to me, sign up for a strategy call. Hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.